The man's rough hand shoved Dunny against the wall of the dingy motel room, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. His breath smelled like cheap gin and cigarettes. His eyes glazed with something dark and hungry. This wasn't what she wanted. It never was, but her body moved on autopilot, her lips forming words she hated. "Please, don't stop." The man laughed, mistaking her trembling for excitement, not recognizing the terror behind her eyes. When his phone rang and he stepped away to answer it, Dunny saw her chance. She grabbed her torn dress and ran barefoot into the night, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would burst through her chest. Blood trickled down her knee from where she'd scraped it on the concrete, but she didn't stop running until she reached the village square. It was past midnight, and the only sound was the distant barking of dogs and the whisper of wind through the palm trees. If you've ever felt trapped by something you couldn't control, stay with me, because Dunny's story will break your heart and put it back together again. Dunny collapsed near the old water pump, her whole body shaking with sobs she'd been holding back for 2 years. She was 24 years old, but she felt ancient, used up, worthless. The villagers called her names: a shawo, prostitute, woman with no shame, but none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that 4 years ago, her own aunt had sold her innocence for money night after night, while her parent believed she was living a better life in the city. The abuse had rewired her brain, turned intimacy into a compulsion she couldn't control, made her body crave the very thing that destroyed her. Now, even though she'd escaped her aunt 2 years ago, she couldn't escape herself. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from men who saw her as nothing more than an object, and the worst part was that sometimes she responded because the loneliness felt worse than the shame. Tonight was supposed to be different. She'd promised herself she would stop, that she would change, but promises meant nothing when your trauma controlled you like a puppet master pulling strings. Dunny! A soft voice cut through the darkness. It was Mama Kimi, the old woman who ran the village health center. She approached slowly, her wrapper tied tightly around her waist, her eyes full of concern rather than judgment. Dunny tried to cover herself, ashamed of her torn dress and disheveled appearance, but Mama Kimi knelt beside her and wrapped a cloth around her shoulders. "Child, what happened to you?" the old woman asked gently. Dunny wanted to lie, to say she'd been attacked, to blame someone else, but something in Mama Kimi's kind eyes made the truth come pouring out. Between sobs, she confessed everything. The years with her aunt in Lagos, the men who paid to violate her, the way her body had been trained to respond to abuse, and the compulsions that still controlled her even now. Mama Kimi listened without interrupting, her weathered face growing sadder with each revelation. When Dunny finally finished speaking, she expected disgust or pity, but Mama Kimi simply pulled her into a tight embrace and whispered words that would change everything. "You are not what happened to you. You are Dunny, daughter of Olukin, and you deserve healing." Those words hit Dunny like a physical blow, releasing something deep inside her that had been locked away for years. For the first time since her nightmare began, someone saw her, really saw her, not as a shameful woman or cautionary tale, but as a victim who needed help. Mama Kimi helped her to her feet and led her toward the health center, promising to call a counselor from the city who specialized in trauma. As they walked through the quiet village, Dunny felt a tiny spark of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. But hope was fragile, and the road ahead would test her in ways she couldn't imagine. The health center was a small building with peeling paint and a corrugated iron roof, but it felt like a sanctuary. Mama Kimi gave Dunny clean clothes and a cup of hot tea, then sat across from her with a serious expression. "Before we can move forward, you need to understand something," she said firmly. "Healing is not easy. You will have to face your aunt. You will have to confront what was done to you. You will have to learn to forgive yourself for things that were never your fault." Dunny's hands trembled around the cup. The thought of seeing her aunt again made her stomach turn, but she knew Mama Kimi was right. Running from her past hadn't worked. It had only left her trapped in patterns she couldn't break. "I'm ready," she whispered, though her voice shook with fear. Mama Kimi nodded and pulled out an old phone. "Good, because the counselor can come tomorrow. But tonight, you need to rest." As Dunny lay on the narrow bed in the health center, staring at the ceiling, she wondered if she really could change. Her body still ached with the familiar cravings. Her mind still replayed the abuse like a broken record, and part of her wanted to run back to the motel and finish what she started. But then her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I saw you at the square tonight." You owe me money for running away. Pay me by morning, or I'll tell the whole village what kind of woman you really are." Her blood ran cold. The man from the motel had found her, and he wanted revenge. Don't go anywhere. Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because next chapter will show you exactly how far Dunny will go to protect the tiny bit of dignity she has left. Will she pay the blackmailer, or will she finally fight back? Comment below what you think she should do. Dunny stared at her phone screen until the words blurred into meaningless shapes, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The message glowed in the darkness. "Pay me by morning, or I'll tell the whole village what kind of woman you really are." Her first instinct was panic, to run again, to disappear into another town where nobody knew her face or her shame. But then something shifted inside her, something hard and cold that she'd never felt before. This man didn't know her story. He didn't know what she'd survived. And she was tired, so desperately tired, of being afraid. She typed back with shaking fingers, "Meet me at the old palm grove at dawn. Come alone." Her thumb hovered over the send button for a long moment before she pressed it. Mema Kimi was asleep in the next room, and Dunny knew the old woman would try to stop her as she knew what she was planning. The Palm Grove was a 15-minute walk from the health center, a place where villagers sometimes held secret meetings or settled disputes away from prying eyes. Dunny had been there once as a child during a harvest festival, back when life was simple and her biggest worry was whether she'd get an extra piece of a car at dinner. Now, as she walked through the pre-dawn darkness with Mama Kimi's kitchen knife hidden in the waistband of a borrowed wrapper, she felt like a completely different person. The air was thick with moisture and the smell of wet earth, and somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed the first warning of sunrise. When she reached the grove, the man was already there, leaning against a palm tree with a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Smart girl," he said with a nasty smile. "You brought the money." Dunny stopped a few meters away, her hand gripping the knife handle beneath her wrapper. "I didn't bring money," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I brought something better. I brought the truth." The man's smile faltered, confusion crossing his face as Dunny pulled out her phone and held it up so he could see the screen. Before coming to the grove, she'd done something reckless and brilliant. She'd recorded a video of herself telling her entire story, the abuse, the trafficking, her aunt's crimes, and how men like him preyed on vulnerable women. She'd uploaded it to a private folder and set it to automatically post to every social media platform if she didn't cancel it within the hour. "If anything happens to me," she continued, "or if you spread lies about me in this village, that video goes public. Your face is in it. Your threats are in it. Your real name. Yes, I found out who you are. Mr. Adekunle Basharan, married man with 3 children, is in it. So who do you think the village will believe? The traumatized girl trying to heal, or the predator who blackmails victims?" For the first time, she saw fear in his eyes instead of her own reflection. Adekunle's cigarette fell from his lips, and he took a step back, his hands raised offensively. "You're crazy," he sputtered. "You're bluffing. No woman would expose herself like that." But Dunny knew something he didn't. Shame only had power when you let it. She'd spent years drowning in shame, letting it dictate her choices and destroy her self-worth. But Mama Kimi's words from last night had planted a seed. You are not what happened to you. If telling her story could stop one more girl from suffering what she'd suffered, then the village's judgment didn't matter anymore. "Try me," she said coldly. "Spread your lies. See what happens." They stood in tense silence, the rising sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, until finally Adekunle backed away completely. "You're not worth the trouble," he muttered, but his voice shook. He turned and practically ran from the grove, and Dunny let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her hands were still trembling when she walked back to the health center, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from adrenaline and something that felt dangerously close to pride. She'd faced down a predator and won. She'd used the same technology that once spread her shame to protect herself. When she slipped back into the health center, she found Mama Kimi awake and waiting, arms crossed over her chest, looking both worried and slightly impressed. "Where did you go?" the old woman asked, her voice tight with concern. Dunny opened her mouth to lie, then stopped herself. "No more lies. No more hiding." She told Mama Kimi everything. The blackmail, the confrontation, the video she created. She expected anger or disappointment, But instead, Mama Kimi's stern expression softened into something like admiration. "You have more strength than you know," the old woman said quietly. "But strength without wisdom is dangerous. Child, what you did was brave, but also reckless. What if he'd been violent?" A sharp knock on the door interrupted her. Mama Kimi opened it to reveal a tall woman in her 30s wearing professional wrapper and blouse, carrying a leather bag. "Good morning. I'm Dr. Neka Okonkwo, the trauma counselor. You must be a dunny." As Dr. Neka smiled warmly and gestured for her to sit down, a dunny felt the walls she'd built around her trauma start to crack. But just when she thought she was finally safe, Dr. Neka asked a question that made her blood run ice cold. "Before we go further, a dunny, I need to ask, is your aunt still trafficking other girls?" What do you think a dunny should do? Should she report her aunt and risk retaliation, or focus on her own healing first? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed because next chapter is where everything explodes, and you won't believe who shows up at a health center door. A dunny's mouth went dry, and her vision narrowed to a single point on the wall behind Dr. Neka's head, a water stain shaped like a hand reaching out. "I don't know," she whispered, the words scraping out of her throat like broken glass. But that was a lie, and they both knew it. Deep down, a dunny knew exactly what her aunt was. Aunt Moreo wasn't a woman who stopped once she found something profitable, and desperate girls from poor families were always profitable. The silence in the room grew heavy until Mama Kimi placed a gentle hand on a dunny's shoulder. "If there are other girls," the old woman said carefully, "then reporting your aunt isn't just about revenge. It's about protection. It's about making sure no other child suffers what you suffered." The logical part of a dunny's brain understood this, but the terrified part, the part that still woke up screaming from nightmares about her aunt's cold eyes and colder hands, wanted to refuse. Reporting Aunt Moreo meant going back to Lagos. It meant facing the woman who'd sold her body like it was merchandise. Dr. Neka leaned forward, her expression serious but kind. "A dunny, I'm not going to force you to do anything. Healing has to happen at your own pace, in your own way. But I'll tell you what I tell all my clients who survive trafficking. Silence protects predators, and predators don't stop until someone stops them." She pulled out a folder from her bag and spread several photographs on the small table between them. "These are girls who were rescued from trafficking rings in Lagos over the past 2 years. 17 of them. Different neighborhoods, different aunties and uncles who promised their families a better life." A dunny's hands trembled as she looked at the photos. Some girls looked as young as 14, their eyes empty and haunted in ways she recognized too well. "Your testimony could help us connect the dots," Dr. Neka continued. "Your aunt's name has come up before in investigations, but witnesses always disappear or recant their stories. With your help, we could finally build a case strong enough to shut her down permanently." The weight of responsibility pressed down on a dunny's chest until she couldn't breathe properly. This wasn't fair. She'd barely begun to pick up her own shattered pieces, and now they were asking her to go to war with the monster who'd broken her in the first place. "What if she comes after me?" A dunny asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "What if she hurts my family? My parents don't even know what she did. They still send her money sometimes, thinking she helped me." Mama Kimi made a disgusted sound in her throat. "Your parents need to know the truth eventually, child. The lies have to stop somewhere." Dr. Neka nodded in agreement. "And as for protection, we have resources. Safe houses, police protection during the trial, relocation assistance if necessary. You wouldn't be alone in this." But a dunny had learned the hard way that promises meant nothing. The government had promised her parents that sending her to Lagos would give her better education opportunities. Her aunt had promised to treat her like a daughter. Men had promised they'd be gentle. Before Dunny could respond, the door to the health center burst open so hard it slammed against the wall. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the morning sun, was a figure that made a Dunny's heart stop completely. Aunt Moreo, dressed in expensive anchor and gold jewelry, her face twisted with rage. "So this is where you've been hiding, you ungrateful rat." Her aunt spat, her voice dripping with venom. Behind her stood 2 large men in dark clothes, their faces expressionless but their intentions clear. Mima Kimi jumped to her feet, placing herself between the dunny and the door. "You have no business here. Moreo, leave now, or I'll call the police." Aunt Moreo laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The police? You think the police care about a prostitute who ran away from home? I've already told everyone in this village what kind of girl she is. I came here to take back what belongs to me. Her eyes locked onto a dunny with frightening intensity. You owe me, girl. For years I fed you, clothed you, gave you a roof over your head. And this is how you repay me? By running away and spreading lies. Dr. Necker stepped forward calmly, pulling out her phone. I'm Dr. Necker Okonkwo, registered trauma counselor and mandatory reporter of human trafficking crimes. If you don't leave immediately, I'm calling the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Aunt Moreo's face, but only for a moment. She gestured to her men, and they started moving into the room. That's when something inside of Dunny snapped. All the fear, all the shame, all the years of being treated like an object instead of a person crystallized into pure fury. She stood up so fast her chair fell backward, and when she spoke, her voice didn't shake at all. You don't owe me any more, she said, each word sharp as a blade. You never did. And if you take one more step into this room, I swear by everything holy that I will make sure you rot in prison for the rest of your miserable life. Aunt Moreo's face contorted with shock. She'd never heard a dunny speak like this before, had never seen anything but compliance and fear in her eyes. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then Mama Akimi picked up the old landline phone on her desk and started dialing. Aunt Moreo calculated her options and chose retreat, but her eyes promised that this wasn't over. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, a dunny. I know people. I know where your parents live, where your younger sister goes to school. You really want to test me. Then she and her men backed out of the health center and disappeared into the village. The moment the door closed, a dunny's legs gave out, but underneath the fear was something new, something fierce, determination. Her aunt had just threatened her family. Dr. Necker held her tightly and said, We need to move fast now. Are you ready to fight? This is about to get intense. Hit that like button if you're ready to see a dunny finally get her justice, and subscribe because next chapter is where she goes back to Lagos to face her demons head on. Will she survive? Will her family believe her? Comment justice if you're team a dunny. The bus to Lagos smelled like diesel fuel, stale bread, and the sweat of too many people crammed into too small a space. A dunny pressed her forehead against the grimy window, watching the village disappear behind walls of green forest and red clay roads. Beside her sat Dr. Necker, and 2 rows behind them were 2 plainclothes police officers from the anti-trafficking unit, both pretending to be regular passengers. The plan was simple but terrifying. A dunny would wear a wire, visit her aunt's compound pretending to apologize and ask for forgiveness, and get her to confess to the trafficking on tape. Simple, except nothing about confronting your abuser was ever simple. You can still back out, Dr. Necker whispered, sensing a dunny's terror. We can build a case without your testimony. It'll take longer, but... No, a dunny interrupted, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. If I don't do this now, I never will. And she threatened my sister, my 12-year-old sister who still believes the world is safe. Lagos hit them like a wall of noise and chaos the moment they stepped off the bus, horns blaring, street vendors shouting, the smell of roasting plantains mixing with open sewage. A dunny had forgotten how overwhelming the city could be, how it swallowed people whole and spit out whoever they used to be. They took a taxi to Agba, where Aunt Moreo's compound sat behind high walls topped with broken glass and barbed wire. The house was exactly as a dunny remembered, a 3-story building painted yellow with green trim, bars on all the windows, and security cameras everywhere. Her aunt had built this fortress with blood money, with the shattered innocence of girls who trusted their families to protect them. Dr. Necker adjusted the tiny microphone hidden in a dunny's necklace and squeezed her hand. Remember, you just need to get her talking. Don't accuse her directly. Let her dig her own grave. The police officers positioned themselves down the street, ready to storm in if things went wrong. A dunny took a deep breath and knocked on the compound gate. The gateman recognized her immediately, his eyes widening with surprise before he quickly schooled his expression into neutrality. Auntie Moreo said if you came back, I should let you in, he said quietly, opening the small door beside the main gate. But she also said to tell you that if you're here to cause trouble, you won't leave the way you came. It was a threat Plain and simple, but Dunny had expected nothing less. She stepped into the compound and was immediately transported back to her worst memories. The small boys' quarters where she and 3 other girls had been kept, the main house where men came and went at all hours, the mango tree where she'd once tried to hang herself before one of the other girls cut her down. The compound was quieter now. No girls visible in the windows, no sounds of crying from the quarters, and Dunny wondered if that was better or worse. Had her aunt moved the operation elsewhere, or had she just gotten better at hiding it? Aunt Moreo was waiting in the living room, seated in a high-back leather chair like a queen on her throne. She'd changed into a more modest outfit, and her expression was carefully neutral. "So," she said, gesturing for Dunny to sit on a low stool across from her, maintaining the power dynamic. "You've come crawling back. Did that old woman in the village finally throw you out?" Dunny bit down on the angry response rising in her throat and instead lowered her head submissively, playing the role her aunt expected. "I'm sorry, Auntie," she said softly, letting tears gather in her eyes. "I was confused. I was angry. But you're right, nobody wants me now." Aunt Moreo's face softened slightly, satisfaction glinting in her eyes. She'd always enjoyed breaking Dunny's spirit, always savored a moment when resistance crumbled into obedience. "Of course you have nowhere to go," she said, almost gently. "That's what I tried to teach you from the beginning. The world is cruel to girls like us, girls from poor families with no connections and no education. I gave you a way to survive." Dunny forced herself to nod, to look grateful instead of disgusted. "I understand that now, Auntie. I want to work for you again. I'll do whatever you need." She watched her aunt carefully, saw the calculation in her eyes. But greed and ego won out. "Well," her aunt said slowly, "I suppose everyone deserves a second chance. And business has been good lately. Very good. I've expanded my operations, not just girls now, but also helping young men find overseas opportunities." Dunny's stomach toned, but she kept her expression neutral. Before she could respond, footsteps thundered on the stairs, and 2 teenage girls appeared in the doorway, carrying cleaning supplies. They froze when they saw Dunny, fear and recognition warring on their young faces. Aunt Moreo noticed the exchange and snapped, "Go back upstairs. If I catch you eavesdropping again, you'll regret it." The girls disappeared like ghosts. Dunny felt her resolve crystallize into diamond-hard determination. She couldn't back out now, not when living proof of her aunt's ongoing crimes was right here in this house. "Actually, Auntie," Dunny said, abandoning the submissive act, "I didn't come here to apologize. I came here to give you a choice." She stood up, ignoring her aunt's sudden fury, and looked her abuser directly in the eyes for the first time in years. "You can confess everything, the trafficking, the abuse, all of it, and maybe get a lighter sentence. Or you can keep lying, and I'll make sure every single girl you destroy gets justice, starting with me." Aunt Moreo shot to her feet, her face contorting with rage. "You're wearing a wire, aren't you? You stupid, stupid girl." She lunged forward, but then the front door burst open and the 2 police officers rushed in, badges raised. Everything happened in a blur. Aunt Moreo screaming about false accusations, officers searching the house and finding the girls upstairs, neighbors gathering at the gate. Through it all, Dunny stood in the middle of the living room, shaking but standing, watching her nightmare finally end. But then one of the officers came downstairs holding a leather-bound ledger, his face grim. As Dunny glimpsed the entries, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Her own father's name, listed multiple times over the past 4 years, with payments marked beside it. Oh my God, did you see that twist coming? Smash that like button if you're as shocked as I am. Next chapter is the emotional conclusion. Subscribe now because you do not want to miss it. Would you forgive your father if he did this? Comment below. Dunny sat on the steps of the Naptip office in Lagos, staring at the ledger in her hands like it was a poisonous snake. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, but she couldn't feel it, couldn't feel anything except the crushing weight of her father's betrayal. Dr. Necker sat beside her in silence, having learned that sometimes the most helpful thing a counselor could do was simply be present. Inside the office, police were processing Aunt Moreo's arrest and interviewing the 2 girls they'd found in the house. Those girls would get justice, would get help, would eventually heal. But Adunni felt like she'd been shattered all over again, all the progress she'd made in the village crumbling to dust. "I need to go home," she finally said, her voice flat and empty. "I need to look my father in the eyes and ask him why." Dr. Necker placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you sure you're ready for that conversation?" But Adunni shook her head. She'd spent years running from hard truths, hiding from painful realities, letting others control her story. Not anymore. She stood up, handed the ledger to a passing officer, and looked at Dr. Necker with new determination. "If I wait, I'll lose my courage." The bus ride back to the village felt longer than the journey to Lagos, every kilometer stretching into eternity. Adunni rehearsed 1,000 different speeches in her head, imagining her father's excuses, his justifications, his denials. But when they finally arrived at a family compound just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, all her prepared words evaporated. Her mother was outside pounding yam for dinner, her younger sister Bissela was drawing water from the well, and her father sat under the mango tree reading a newspaper. It looked like a scene from a happy life, a normal family, and the disconnect between appearance and reality made Adunni want to scream. "Adunni!" Bissela spotted her first and came running, her face lighting up with joy. Her mother dropped the pestle and rushed over, pulling Adunni into a crushing embrace. But her father stayed seated under the mango tree, and when Adunni met his eyes over her mother's shoulder, she saw guilt and fear, not surprise or joy. He knew. Dr. Necker hung back near the compound entrance, giving the family space but staying close enough to intervene if needed. Adunni gently extracted herself from her mother's embrace and walked toward her father with slow, deliberate steps. "Papa," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her, "I need you to tell Mama and Bissela the truth about where I really was for the past 4 years. About what Aunt Moreo did to me. About the money she paid you." The compound went silent. Her mother's smile froze, then slowly crumbled into confusion and concern. Bissela looked between them, sensing the tension but not understanding it, and her father's face collapsed in on itself like a building falling. "Adunni, please," he whispered. "Not here. Not in front of them." But Adunni didn't move. "If not here, then where, Papa? How many more years should I carry your shame along with my own?" Her mother stepped forward, her voice sharp with maternal protectiveness. "What is happening? Somebody explain to me." And so Adunni explained, every horrible detail. The way her father had agreed to send her to Lagos knowing what Aunt Moreo did for a living. The payments he'd received. The 4 years of abuse while her family lived slightly better on blood money. Her mother's wails could probably be heard in the next village. She collapsed to the ground, tearing at her clothes. Bissela started crying too, frightened by the adult emotions exploding around her. And her father just sat there with tears streaming down his face, not even trying to deny the accusations. "We were starving," he finally said, his voice broken. "Your mother was sick. Bissela needed school fees. Moreo offered solution. Liar." Adunni's shout cut through his excuses like a machete. "You knew exactly what kind of shop Aunt Moreo ran. You just didn't care because your daughter's body was worth less to you than your comfort." Mama Kimi appeared at the compound gate, having somehow heard the commotion. She took one look at the scene and took charge. "Everyone inside the house," she commanded. "This conversation needs to happen in private." Once they were all seated in the small living room, Mama Kimi made tea that nobody drank and spoke with quiet wisdom. "What happened to Adunni is not forgivable. What you did, Olokin, has no excuse. But standing here screaming at each other won't undo the past. The question now is, what happens next?" Adunni's mother looked at her daughter with such raw pain. "Can you forgive us?" she whispered. Adunni thought about all the therapy sessions she'd need, all the years of healing ahead, all the ways this trauma would shape the rest of her life. She thought about the girls she'd helped save, about the strength she'd discovered in herself. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Papa, but I can't move forward if I'm carrying this rage everywhere I go. So maybe we start with the truth. No more secrets. You tell everyone in this village what you did. You face the consequences. And I'll work on healing." The next few months were the hardest of Adunni's life, and also the most hopeful. Her father confessed publicly, was charged as an accomplice, but received a suspended sentence in exchange for his testimony. The village judged him harshly, but they rallied around Aduni's mother and sister. Aduni moved back to the health center with Mama Kimi and attended weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Necker, slowly learning to separate her identity from her trauma. She started a support group for trafficking survivors, using her story to help other girls find their voices. And 6 months after that terrible confrontation, something unexpected happened. She laughed. Really laughed. The kind of full-belly laughter that came from genuine joy. She was helping Mama Kimi organize medical supplies when the old woman made a ridiculous joke about a confused chicken that had wandered into the health center, and Aduni found herself doubled over with laughter. When the laughter finally subsided, she realized something profound. She was healing. The compulsions were fading, replaced with healthier ways of seeking comfort. She'd started seeing a young man named Chidi, a teacher who knew her whole story and loved her anyway. And on a bright Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year after she fled that motel room, Aduni stood in front of a Lagos courtroom and delivered a victim impact statement that helped sentence Aunt Moreo to 15 years in prison. As she walked out into the Lagos sunshine, Dr. Necker by her side, Aduni felt something she'd never thought possible. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of hope. So what now? Dr. Necker asked. Aduni smiled, a real smile, full of possibility. Now I finish school. Then maybe I study social work. Someone needs to help girls like me. She looked around at the chaotic beauty of Lagos. I used to think the city destroyed me, but maybe it just revealed who I could become. Maybe all that suffering wasn't meaningless if I can use it to save even one girl. Dr. Necker raised a glass and a toast. To Aduni Olokin, survivor, warrior, and proof that healing is possible. They clinked glasses, and as Aduni took a sip, she felt the last chains finally break away. She was free, not because her trauma had disappeared, but because she'd decided it would no longer define her. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in 8 years, she was walking it on her own terms. And that was enough. Thank you for staying with Aduni through this journey. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it. Remember, healing is possible, and you are not what happened to you. Drop a comment if you believe in second chances. See you in the next story. Stay blessed.